The night swallowed me whole, cold and damp, like a premature tomb. I was sitting on the sidewalk in front of a building called Golden Years, a name that sounded like a cruel joke of fate. The fine rain of El Paso, Texas, mixed with the tears I no longer had the strength to shed, soaking my thin, worn coat. The air smelled of wet asphalt and the garbage piled up in a nearby alley, a funereal perfume for the dignity that had just died inside me. The only light came from a solitary lamppost, whose yellowed, flickering bulb seemed as tired of fighting as I was. The distant sound of a train cutting through the darkness was the only lament that accompanied my silence. I huddled, trying to protect myself from a cold that came more from within than from without. My 75 years weighed on every bone, a burden intensified by the hunger that rumbled shamefully in my stomach. The building before me, with its dark windows and impersonal facade, promised care and shelter, but its doors were locked, indifferent to my helplessness. It was a fortress of false hope. Every drop of rain that hit the cement seemed to whisper the same word: abandoned. The loneliness was so palpable I could feel it like an icy cloak over my shoulders, heavier than any blanket. My son, Ricardo, whom I affectionately called Rick, stopped his old, noisy car right there, under the sickly light of the lamppost. He didn't turn off the engine, a clear sign that his haste to get rid of me was greater than any remnant of respect. He looked at me through the rearview mirror, and his eyes, which were once my world, were now cold and calculating, like those of a loan shark collecting the last installment of an unpayable debt. He wore a faux leather jacket that tried to look expensive, and a flashy gold ring on his finger, bought with the money I had given him, the money that should have secured my old age. With a harshness that hurt me more than any physical blow, he opened the door and pulled me by the arm, dragging me out of the vehicle. My frail feet barely found the ground, and I stumbled, nearly falling into the puddle forming on the sidewalk. "Where are we, my son? What is happening?" I asked, and my voice came out as a thread, trembling and pathetic, still clinging to a hope he had crushed long ago. He didn't answer. His silence was a wall of contempt against which my questions crashed and died. The force in his grip was that of someone discarding a useless object, a burden that had become unbearable. He then threw a small, crumpled paper bag into my lap. The touch of the paper was rough against my wrinkled hands. Inside, there was a single stale piece of bread, hard as a rock. It was the final symbol of his cruel charity, an alms for the woman who gave him life, who sacrificed every dream and every penny so he could have a chance. That bread was not food. It was a sentence. It was the materialization of everything I meant to him at that moment. A nuisance. One less mouth to feed. A problem solved in the most cowardly way possible. "They'll find you in the morning," he said, and his voice held not a shred of emotion. It was flat, dead, as if he were reading a sales report. "They'll take pity on you and take you in. I have nothing left to give you. You're a bottomless pit." Each word was a shovel of dirt thrown on top of me. Bottomless pit. The phrase echoed in my head, a final accusation that branded me with a hot iron. I, who had emptied myself for him, who had dried up every last drop of hope and resources to quench his infinite thirst for more, was now the bottomless abyss. He didn't wait for a reply. There was no last look, no goodbye. He simply turned, got into the car, and with a metallic click that sealed my fate, locked the doors. The sound of that lock was the final period in the story of my life as a mother. It was the confirmation that, to him, I no longer existed on the inside, in the warmth, in safety. My place was out here, in the dark, left to the luck or mercy of strangers, because that of my own son had completely run out, if it ever existed at all. The car sped off with a screech of tires on the wet asphalt. The red taillights were two embers of hatred that receded quickly until they were swallowed by the night. I followed them with my eyes until there was nothing left, only the rain and the darkness. The sound of the engine fading into the distance was the sound of my loneliness becoming absolute and irrevocable. In that moment, I was no longer Sofia Ramirez, the seamstress, the widow, the mother. I was just a trembling shadow on the sidewalk, a dirty secret the night was meant to hide. The cold was now unbearable, a shiver that started in my soul and spread through my body, making my teeth chatter uncontrollably. I hugged the paper bag to my chest, not for the bread, but because it was the last thing he had touched, the last physical connection to the son I had loved and lost forever. The moldy smell of the bread wafted up to my nostrils, mixing with the scent of rain and despair. It was a banquet of misery, and I was the only guest. The hunger in my stomach was a sharp pain, a constant pang that reminded me of my physical fragility, but it was an insignificant pain, a distant echo compared to the hole that had opened in my chest. The pain of the soul was a dark, icy abyss, a wound that bled inward, drowning all my happy memories. His betrayal was a poison running through my veins, paralyzing my heart. I would rather starve 1,000 times than feel that agony. The world around me disappeared. The sound of the train, the light from the lamppost, the falling rain, everything became an indistinct blur. My body trembled, but my mind was frozen in a single moment, in a single sound, the click of the car door locking. I was a statue of pain, sculpted by the cruelty of my own son and left to erode under the relentless rain. I felt invisible, a piece of trash discarded on the sidewalk, exactly as he saw me. The break was silent, without screams or sobs. It was an implosion, a feeling of nothingness, the end of everything. I felt as if my spirit simply detached from my body and floated away, leaving behind only an old, cold shell. I closed my eyes, not to sleep, but to cease to exist. If death were to come for me that night, it would find no resistance. It would be a welcome liberation from the pain of being a mother whose love was returned with a stale piece of bread and a cold sidewalk. In that instant, the humiliation was so complete, so overwhelming, that the only thing left was emptiness. The paper bag in my hands was the physical proof of my failure, the trophy of my uselessness. The bread he gave me was not to feed me. It was to remind me forever of the price of my devotion. And as the rain washed the dirt from the streets of El Paso, I felt that it would never be able to wash away the stain he had left on my soul. There, on that piece of cold cement, the story of Sophia, the mother, ended. And in the silence that followed, at the bottom of that pit of pain, something new and unknown began to germinate. A seed of survival, as hard and bitter as the bread I held, waiting for the first ray of sunlight to begin to sprout. But on that night, there was only darkness. If this story has already touched your heart, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next, and comment from which city or country you are watching us. We want to know how far Sophia's journey is reaching. The darkness began to give way to a pale, sickly gray. The rain stopped, but the cold persisted, clinging to me like a shroud. I could barely make out shapes. My body was so numb I wasn't sure if I was still alive. It was then that a silhouette appeared at the door of the nursing home, framed against the faint light coming from within. It was a young woman, dressed in a white nurse's uniform. She stopped for a moment, and I felt her eyes on me, even from a distance. For a moment, fear overcame me. I thought she would shoo me away, see me as the filth I felt I was. I closed my eyes, waiting for the reprimand, the indifference. But instead of harsh words, I heard the sound of shoes approaching softly. A voice, young and melodious, broke the oppressive silence. "Ma'am? My God, are you all right?" I opened my eyes and saw her face. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, with dark, kind eyes that held no judgment, only genuine and alarmed concern. She knelt beside me on the wet sidewalk, not caring about soiling her impeccable uniform. Her hand, warm and soft, touched my shoulder, and that simple gesture of human warmth was so shocking, so unexpected, that a single tear finally escaped and rolled down my frozen face. She didn't ask any more questions. With a strength surprising for her slender frame, she put an arm around my back and helped me up. "Let's go inside." "You're freezing," she said, her voice firm but gentle. Every step into that building was torture for my stiffened joints. but she supported me, bearing my weight without complaint. Crossing that threshold was like moving from hell to a purgatory of fluorescent light and the smell of disinfectant. The artificial warmth of the environment hit me full force, making my skin ache, but it was a welcome pain, a pain that meant I could still feel something other than despair. The young nurse, whose name tag read Isabella, took me to a small nurse's station and sat me in a soft chair. With quiet efficiency, she removed my soaked coat and my old shoes, treating my fragile body with a respect I had forgotten existed. She wrapped me in the warmest, softest blanket I had ever felt in my entire life. The plush cotton against my skin was like a hug, a silent promise of safety. I trembled uncontrollably, not just from the cold, but from the overload of a kindness I didn't feel I deserved. I remained silent, watching her, unable to form a single word of thanks. A few minutes later, Isabella returned with a bowl of hot soup. The steam rose in fragrant spirals, and the smell of chicken broth and vegetables awakened the hunger I had been trying to ignore. My hands trembled so much I could barely hold the spoon. Seeing my struggle, she took the bowl and, without a word, sat in front of me and began to feed me the soup, spoonful by spoonful, as if I were a child. I, who had spent my entire life feeding my son, was now being fed by a complete stranger. The humiliation I expected to feel was replaced by an overwhelming wave of gratitude. Each spoonful of hot soup that went down my throat was not just nourishment for my body, but a balm for my wounded soul. It was warmth, it was care, it was humanity. In that moment, in that small, sterile room, under Isabella's compassionate gaze, I felt a tiny spark of life reignite within me. She didn't ask me how I ended up there, didn't press me for answers. She simply saw me as a human being in need and acted. Her compassion was a pure, untethered gift, and I received it like a castaway receiving their first sip of fresh water. In the days that followed, as my strength slowly returned, memories of the past assaulted me in waves. I saw myself again as a young seamstress, working late into the night, my fingers sore and pricked by needles, all to ensure Ricardo had the best shoes, the best books, the best education my meager money could buy. I remembered the pride I felt at his high school graduation, the absolute certainty that every sacrifice had been worth it. How could I have been so blind? How could I water a plant with so much love and watch it grow so twisted and poisonous? One memory in particular tormented me. The day I sold the wedding ring my late husband Antonio had given me. Ricardo was 25 and had a foolproof idea for an import business. He needed $5,000. I sold the last piece of my past, the symbol of the purest love I had ever known, and gave him the money with a smile, believing in his promises. He lost it all in less than 6 months on bad investments and, as I later found out, at poker tables. That day, I didn't just lose a ring. I lost the first piece of my faith in him. Guilt gnawed at me from the inside, a disease more devastating than age. Where did I go wrong? Was I too loving? Was I too weak? Was my unconditional love, instead of being a foundation, a cushion that prevented him from feeling the impact of his own failures? These questions spun in my mind, a carousel of self-accusation that never stopped. I had created the monster that devoured me, and now I had to live with that bitter truth. His abandonment was not just an act of cruelty, it was a reflection of my failure as a mother. While I drowned in my guilt, Isabella was a constant, gentle presence. She would come to check my blood pressure, bring my medication, but she always stayed a little longer to talk. She spoke about her day, about the other residents, about her dreams. I learned that she had come from Mexico as a child, that her family worked hard in the fields, and that she was the first to pursue higher education. She worked at the nursing home at night and studied during the day, sleeping only 4 or 5 hours, fighting tirelessly for a better future. Her story of struggle and resilience moved me deeply. There was a strength and a purity in her that reminded me of how I used to be, before life and disappointments bent me. In her small kindnesses, an extra cookie on the tray, a flower she picked from the garden and placed in a glass by my bed, I found a comfort that my son's money never bought. A silent bond began to form between us, that of two souls who understood what it was to struggle, what it was to sacrifice, what it was to dream. One afternoon, I passed by the break room and heard her speaking softly on the phone. Her voice was tense, filled with a worry she tried to hide from everyone. She was speaking to her mother in Spanish, explaining that her nursing school tuition had gone up, and she didn't know how she would afford the next payment. "No, mamá. No te preocupes. Voy a encontrar una manera," she said, but I could hear the restrained tears in her throat. In that instant, something shifted inside me. The image of my suffering gave way to the image of hers. Hearing Isabella's anguish was like an electric shock to my dormant heart. For the first time since that terrible night, I felt something other than pain and self-pity. I felt anger. A cold, lucid anger. Anger at my son, who squandered tens of thousands of dollars on his whims, while a young woman so deserving fought for every penny to build a future helping others. In that moment, a decision began to form in my mind. I had one last asset, one last shred of power in this world, my house, and I would not leave it to the monster who discarded me. The tranquility, however, was short-lived. 2 weeks after my abandonment, Ricardo showed up at the nursing home. He walked into the common room with a bouquet of cheap carnations and a rehearsed smile on his face, like an actor in a bad play. He hugged me, a cold and performative hug, and said loudly for everyone to hear, "Mama, thank God I found you. I was so worried." His performance was so convincing that I saw the director of the nursing home, a stern woman named Mrs. Davis, relax and smile sympathetically at him. He sat down with Mrs. Davis and told an elaborate story about my progressive dementia, about how I had been running away and getting confused. He painted a picture of himself as a dedicated, suffering son, struggling to care for a mentally unstable mother. "She needs 24-hour professional care. I just want what's best for her," he said, with false tears shining in his eyes. I watched the scene, paralyzed, seeing him manipulate everyone with the same ease with which he had always manipulated me. Mrs. Davis, completely deceived, began to treat me with a pitiful condescension. She suggested that it might be best for me to sign a power of attorney so that my ever-so-attentive son could manage my assets, including the house, to avoid future complications. The trap was closing around me. Ricardo was using the very institution that had saved me to deliver the final blow, to steal the last piece of my life and leave me with absolutely nothing, not even my autonomy. Later, he managed to get a moment alone with me in my room. The smile vanished, and the cold, calculating face I knew so well returned. "Listen carefully, Mama," he whispered, his voice a venomous hiss. "You are going to sign those papers. If you don't, I will go to a judge, tell them you're crazy, and they will lock you in a psychiatric ward where you will never see the light of day again. I'm doing this for your own good." The threat hung in the air, suffocating. For an instant, terror paralyzed me. The image of being locked away, declared insane, powerless, almost made me give in. I could taste the fear in my mouth, the same fear that had controlled me for years. But then, another image appeared in my mind. Isabella's face, her kindness, her struggle. That face gave me a strength I didn't know I possessed. I looked at my son, the stranger sitting in front of me, and for the first time, I didn't see the boy I raised, but the cruel man he had become. The tension in the small room was almost unbearable. Ricardo pushed a pen and a stack of papers towards me. "Go on. Sign. Let's get this over with," he urged, his impatience leaking through his facade of concern. I looked at the documents, at the line where my name was supposed to be written, the line that would seal my final surrender. His hand tapped nervously on his leg, his eyes fixed on mine, trying to intimidate me, to bend me to his will as he always had. He underestimated me. He thought I was the same weak, submissive woman he had left on the sidewalk. He didn't know that his cruelty, paradoxically, had freed me. By taking everything from me, he had left me with nothing to lose. The humiliation he had inflicted on me had burned away all my fear, leaving behind only a hard ash of resolve. I was not going to be the victim in his story. I would be the hero of mine. I held his gaze, a silence stretching between us. On the outside, I was just a frail old woman in a nursing home bed. But inside, a wall of steel was being forged. The connection I had created with Isabella, based on mutual respect and compassion, was now my shield. The love I felt for her, a reborn maternal love directed at someone who deserved it, was my sword. Ricardo was no longer dealing with his mother. He was dealing with a survivor. "I need to think," I said, my voice surprisingly firm. He was furious, but he restrained himself in front of the staff. "All right, Mama. Think it over," he said, with a tone that was a clear threat. "I'll be back soon." When he left, I didn't feel fear. I felt the weight of the battle to come, but I also felt the certainty that, for the first time in my life, I wasn't fighting just for myself. I was fighting for Isabella's future and for my own soul. After Ricardo left, a heavy silence lingered in the room, but the fear he left behind quickly turned into a cold determination. I knew I couldn't fight this battle alone. That same night, I called for Isabella, and with a voice still trembling, I told her not the details of my life, but the essential truth. My son was trying to take my house, and I needed help. I saw in her eyes the spark of understanding and loyalty. She held my hand and said the words that became my anchor. "We will figure this out, Sophia. You are not alone." True to her word, Isabella acted. The next day, she introduced me to David Chen, an idealistic young lawyer who did pro bono work at a community center she frequented. David listened to me with a patience and respect that moved me. He didn't see me as a confused elderly woman, but as a lucid and wronged woman. I explained my plan to him: to sell the house as quickly as possible and use the money to create a fund, starting with Isabella. His eyes lit up at the audacity of my idea, a poetic justice he committed to helping me achieve. The plan was set in motion with impressive speed. David confirmed that the house, my only remaining asset, was legally and solely in my name. He found a young couple, the Millers, who were looking for their first home and were willing to pay cash for a quick deal, a fair price of $120,000. As the papers were prepared in secret, every signature I made was a step towards my liberation. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but for the first time, it was smaller than my hope. Finally, the day of the confrontation arrived. It was a sunny Tuesday, a stark contrast to the storm about to erupt. I waited for Ricardo in the nursing home's visiting room, an impersonal space with plastic furniture and the smell of loneliness. David was by my side, his calm presence my shield. Isabella had lent me one of her most beautiful shawls, a sky blue color. As I put it on, I felt as if I were wrapped in her courage, ready for the final battle for my dignity. Ricardo entered the room with the arrogance of a conqueror. He carried the transfer papers as if they were a surrender treaty, and held a cheap pen as if it were a sword. He smiled his oily smile and sat in front of me, pushing the documents across the table. "Ready, Mama? I'm glad you've come to your senses. Sign here and we can forget all about this. I'll make sure you're very well taken care of," he said, his voice dripping with a false generosity that turned my stomach. I looked at his face, the face I had kissed and caressed for so many years, and felt nothing but a cold distance. He was a stranger to me now. I ignored the pen he offered. My hand, which once trembled with fear and weakness, was steady. With a slow, deliberate movement, I pushed the stack of papers back towards him, until it touched his fingers. The soft sound of the paper sliding across the table was the first shot of my silent revolution. "I'm not signing anything, Ricardo." My voice wasn't loud, but it echoed in the room with the weight of a sentence. The smile on his face faltered, then dissolved completely. His eyes narrowed, confusion quickly giving way to restrained fury. "What did you say? Stop this foolishness, Mother. Just sign it," he ordered, his voice losing its condescending tone and becoming hard and threatening, the voice he used when the mask came off. At that exact moment, as we had rehearsed, David stood up calmly and opened the door to the visiting room. The Miller couple walked in, their faces a mixture of nervousness and determination. They gave me a small, supportive nod. Ricardo looked at them, then at David, and back at me, his calculating mind frantically trying to understand what was happening, who these intruders were in his guaranteed victory. David then uttered the words that demolished my son's world. "Ricardo, I'd like to introduce Mr. and Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice perfectly calm and professional. He paused for maximum impact before continuing. "They are the new legal owners of the house on Flores Street. The sale was finalized this morning." Ricardo's face went from pale white to deep red in seconds. The reality hit him like a runaway train. It was as if the very structure of his arrogance had imploded. He leaped to his feet, the plastic chair toppling backward with a dull thud. "What? You couldn't do that!" he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me, his voice cracking with disbelief and rage. "You ungrateful old woman," he exploded, the fury finally breaking through all barriers. "I gave you everything. I sacrificed for you. And this is how you thank me? By stealing what is mine by right?" His venom filled the room, but the words didn't touch me. They were just the noise of a pathetic man who had lost his personal ATM forever. I stood up, too. And for the first time, I didn't feel small or hunched over. I felt as tall as a mountain. I looked him directly in the eyes, and my voice, when I spoke, was unbreakable, forged in the fire of pain and resilience. "You gave me nothing, Ricardo. You took. You left me on the street, hungry and cold. You gave me a stale piece of bread and you took my dignity." I saw Isabella standing at the door, her eyes full of tears, but also of pride. My gaze met hers for a second, and in it, I found all the strength I needed to deliver the final blow. I pointed to her, a gesture that sealed my past and inaugurated my future. Today, I reclaimed my dignity, and with it, I bought a future for someone who deserves it. My last words to him were spoken with a devastating calm. "The money from the house, Ricardo, the $120,000, has all gone into a scholarship fund. It will pay for Isabella's nursing school, and for other young people like her who work here. As for you," I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "You can have the bread." For a long moment, Ricardo stood there, gaping, his face a mask of impotent fury. The sound of his own ragged breathing was the only response to my verdict. He looked at me, at Isabella, at the lawyer, as if searching for a trick, a loophole in his defeat. Finding none, he let out a guttural sound, the growl of a wounded animal, and turned, storming out of the room so violently he bumped into Mrs. Miller. The sound of his heavy, angry footsteps echoing down the hall was the music of my victory. When the door slammed shut, the silence that remained in the room was not empty, but filled with a deep peace. The tension dissipated like smoke, and I took a deep breath for the first time in years, an air that was clean, free from my son's poison. Isabella rushed to my side and hugged me, her sobs of gratitude wetting the blue shawl on my shoulder. "Thank you, Sophia. You've changed my life," she whispered. I hugged her back, feeling in her warmth the confirmation that I had made the right decision. I hadn't lost a son. I had gained a daughter. In the following days, with David's help, I formalized my decision. The money from the sale was deposited into a trust fund, the Ramirez Scholarship, with clear rules, to help finance the education of young, low-income employees of that nursing home and others in the region. With the small pension I had left, I made an arrangement to remain at Golden Years, not as a destitute charity case, but as a paying resident. That place, which was once the scene of my abandonment, became, by my own choice, my home. My life was transformed. I was no longer the silent shadow hiding in the corners. I became the heart of our small community. I started a sewing club, mending the clothes of other residents and teaching the younger nurses how to sew on a button. I read the newspapers aloud to those whose eyesight no longer allowed it, and I told stories of my youth, recovering the good memories that pain had buried. I found a renewed purpose, not in caring for one, but in looking after many. The nursing home changed too. My story spread like a local legend. a tale of resilience that inspired everyone. The residents became more engaged, more connected. My presence reminded them that old age wasn't the end, but could be a new beginning. The place that once smelled of disinfectant and resignation now had the aroma of fresh coffee, of thread, and of hope. It ceased to be a waiting room for death and became a vibrant home, full of life. The most beautiful effect to witness was Isabella's blossoming. Freed from the pressure of working 2 jobs, she dove into her studies. Her grades, which were already good, became excellent. She would come show me her tests with a contagious pride, and we would celebrate each small victory with tea and cookies on my balcony. Watching her intelligence and compassion bloom was the greatest reward I could. Imagine the best investment I had ever made in my life. A year later, the Ramirez Scholarship awarded its second grant. The recipient was a young caregiver named Leo, a quiet, dedicated boy who dreamed of being a physical therapist. The day I handed him the check, I saw in his eyes the same mix of disbelief and gratitude I had seen in Isabella's. In that moment, I understood that my action was not an act of revenge against Ricardo, but an act of creation. I was planting seeds of hope, and they were germinating. I redefined for myself the meaning of the word mother. I realized that motherhood is not in the blood you share, but in the love you cultivate. It is the ability to see the potential in someone and offer the fertile soil of opportunity so they can grow. My children were now Isabella, Leo, and all the other young people whose lives I could touch. It was a family I had not birthed, but one I had chosen, and which, more importantly, had chosen me back. The contrast between my old life and the new one was immense. Before, I lived in a large house but felt terribly alone, bound to a toxic obligation. Now, I lived in a small room, but my heart was full. I was surrounded by laughter, by shared stories, by genuine affection. I had traded the material wealth my son coveted for richness of spirit, and I discovered that the latter was the only one that truly mattered. My philosophy of life became simple. The greatest pain can be the raw material for the greatest kindness. Ricardo's cruelty didn't destroy me. It broke me, yes, but it broke me like a jar is broken so that light can enter. And the light that entered was compassion, empathy, and a sense of purpose that gave me the happiest and most meaningful old age I could have ever asked for. The abandonment that should have been my end became my true beginning. The days now passed with a serene tranquility. My mornings were spent in the nursing home garden, which I helped to revitalize, tending to the roses. The afternoons were for conversation and sewing, and the nights were for peace, asleep without nightmares, without the anguish of waiting for a call that would never come, from a son who didn't care. Loneliness, my old companion, had finally left me. In my old home, I was Ricardo's mother, a role defined by him, which exhausted and discarded me. Here, in my new home, I was simply Sophia, the friend, the confidant, the storyteller, the matriarch of an unlikely family. My worth was no longer defined by who discarded me, but by those who took me in and by how I chose to rise up and flourish from the ashes. The story of my resilience became a testament, proof that it's never too late to rewrite the ending of your own story. A lesson that true wealth is not in a house or a bank account, but in the ability to transform suffering into a source of hope for others, to find love in the most unexpected places, and to build a legacy of kindness. Sitting on the balcony, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky with warm colors, I felt a deep peace. Isabella was by my side, reading to me about new techniques in elderly care, her voice full of passion and knowledge. She was the future, and I, with my past of pain transformed into a present of joy, was proof that love, true love, is not a bottomless pit, but an inexhaustible spring. 3 years later, the graduation ceremony was packed. From my seat in the front row, I watched Isabella walk across the stage to receive her nursing diploma with honors. She was the class valedictorian. When she smiled at the crowd, her eyes met mine, and in that look, we shared the entire journey we had traveled. The Ramirez Scholarship had already helped 5 other young people follow their dreams. My legacy was alive and vibrant. Later, at the celebration, Isabella announced that she had been promoted to head nurse at Golden Years. My home was in good hands. The final scene takes place at a busy intersection in downtown El Paso. Disheveled man, thin and with a vacant look, walks between the cars stopped at the traffic light. His face is Ricardo's, aged by a hard life on the streets. He holds a piece of cardboard with a handwritten phrase, "Hungry. Please help." The drivers avert their eyes, indifferent. He, who once called me a bottomless pit, had become one, while the woman he abandoned with a stale piece of bread had become a source of hope for many. Have you ever done a gesture of kindness that changed a life? Leave a heart emoji if you believe that love is more powerful than any wealth. Subscribe for more stories of second chances. Comment, "Love is priceless," if you also believe in human kindness.